we're past the watershed, so I can say this. Show me a single self-respecting man that would like to climb into bed with that woman ever, who wasn't an incel, who wasn't a cucked little incel. That little woman has been fed, spoon-fed oppression day after day after day after day, starting with the lie of the gender wage gap. And she sat there, and I'm going like, if I met you in a bar and that was like sentence 3, chances of me just walking away are just huge. We need powerful, strong, amazing women who make great points for themselves. We don't need these sort of feminist 4.0. They're pathetic and embarrassing. Who'd want to shag that?
No doubt by now, especially if you live in the UK, you've heard the story of Laurence Fox getting sacked, as you Brits will put it, by GBN for controversial and misogynistic comments that he made against one Ava Evans, or Santina, whatever she wants to call herself. Now I'm going to show you the video that led him to make those comments. But before we begin, please like, share, and subscribe. Hit that notification bell to get notified of future videos. Timestamps are below. And let's begin.
In the Times, this headline, Rishi Sunak urged to appoint Minister for Men, suggested by a Conservative MP. New role would champion issues such as reducing male suicide. Would that be something you'd be in favour of?
Well, what's interesting about that is the hostility it sometimes faces whenever it comes up. I saw a programme where there was like a feminist academic and a Lib Dem MP, and they were so hostile to this idea. And I thought, if you flipped those things, i.e. that it's the biggest cause of death for men under 50 is suicide, men are less likely to go to the doctors, men are less likely to maintain friendships. If that was for women, we'd often look at, well, why is society making that happen? Whereas with men, the argument is often, why are they doing that to themselves? So I'm not like totally wedded to the idea, but the hostility towards the idea, I find it instructive.
Ava?
I think that it feeds into the culture a little bit, this Minister for Men argument. In my mind, I think there should be a Minister for Mental Health, which would be all-encompassing. I mean, you've got something like 7 million children waiting for prescriptions for mental health at the moment. It's a crisis that's endemic throughout the country, not specific to men. And I think, a lot of ministers kind of bandy this about to sort of, I'm sorry, but make an enemy out of women. I think, not you, and I don't think your book is. But I think Sunak.
I don't accept that. I don't think it is to make an enemy. If we looked at during COVID, men were literally more likely to die from COVID. And I don't really want to cast myself as a meninist or one of these guys from the manosphere, because that's not who I am. But I do find it interesting that sometimes the arguments tend to throw it back.
But who was doing all the work during COVID? A lot of the time, if you looked into people's households, it was the women who were taking on the laundry, the school care, all of that.
I'm not disputing any of that. What I'm saying that there are specific issues that men face that might warrant specific attention. I mean, literally, the biggest killer of men under 50 is suicide. That is an arresting statistic, and if that doesn't warrant specific attention, mental health is an umbrella issue.
I have to say that is also because women are unsuccessful. That is a lot of feeds into that statistic.
But it feels like, it just doesn't feel like you've got any space for this idea that men might have unique challenges that face them.
Because she did actually respond to this earlier today, saying that she regretted her comments, but she didn't apologise. Yes.
Now, I'll get back to Laurence Fox and Ava Evans in a bit, but I wanted to take a moment to talk about male suicide, because I believe it's a topic that no one really talks about. It's never highlighted. And if it is highlighted, you'll get people like Ava saying what she said when the topic was discussed in that panel. BBC Future: Why More Men Than Women Die by Suicide. March 17th, 2019. In countries around the world, women are more likely to be diagnosed with depression and to attempt suicide. So why is the male suicide rate still several times higher than female? 6 years ago, my brother took his own life. He was 28 years old. Tragically, suicide is not as rare as one might think. In 2016, the last year global data is available from the World Health Organization, there were an estimated 793,000 suicide deaths worldwide. Most were men. In the UK, the male suicide rate is its lowest since 1981, 15.5 deaths per 100,000. But suicide is still the single biggest killer of men under the age of 45. And a marked gender split remains. For UK women, the rate is a third of men's, 4.9 suicides per 100,000. It's the same way in many other countries. Compared to women, men are 3 times more likely to die by suicide in Australia, 3.5 times more likely in the US, and more than 4 times more likely in Russia and Argentina, whose data shows that nearly 40% of countries have more than 15 suicide deaths per 100,000 men. Only 1.5 show a rate that's higher for women. The trend goes back a long way. As long as we've been recording it, we've seen this disparity, says psychologist Jill Harkavy-Friedman, Vice President of Research for the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, a health organization that supports those affected by suicide. Suicide is a hugely sensitive, complex issue with a tangled multitude of causes, and the very nature of a death by suicide means we can never fully know the reasons behind it. Still, as mental health awareness has grown, there is greater public understanding about potential contributing factors. One of the questions that has persisted, though, regards this gender gap. It seems especially large given that women tend to have high rates of depression diagnosis. Other risk factors can be related to family or work. When there's an economic downturn that results in increased unemployment, for example, there tends to be an associated increase in suicide, typically 18 to 24 months after the downturn. One 2015 study found that for every 1% increase in unemployment, there is a 0.79 increase in suicide rate. Having to worry about finances or trying to find a job can exacerbate mental health issues for everyone, but there are elements of social pressure and identity crisis too. We're brought up our entire lives to judge others in comparison with our peers and to be economically successful, says Simon Gunning, the CEO of Campaign Against Living Miserably, a UK-based award-winning charity dedicated to preventing male suicide. When there are economic factors we can't control, it becomes very difficult. There can also be a spiraling effect. In the US, for example, health insurance often is linked to employment. If a person is being treated for depression or substance abuse, they may lose that care when they lose their job. Another risk factor is a sense of isolation. A physician, Tom Joyner, writes in his book, Why People Die by Suicide, this can manifest itself in every walk of life. The outwardly successful professional who has prioritized career advancement to the detriment of all else, including social relationships, may find himself at the top of the pyramid, alone, says Grunau. Now, it's not just the West. Worldwide, male suicide rate is a problem, and more males are more likely to commit suicide than females, up to 3 times as much. Suicide rates in selected countries as of 2020 by gender per 100,000 population. I see it here is a list of countries. In the gray is women, in the black is male, and in the blue it's total. So as you can see here, Korea, women are 14.9 while males are 34.9. Lithuania, women 7.5, men 35.9. Japan, women 9.8, men 21.2. You can go down every statistic. You see males outpace females when it comes to suicide rates. This is from Statista, and this to me is just an example of the epidemic that's going on. This is an epidemic that is going on, but it's not talked about. As you can see, the male to female suicide ratio by country, and Sri Lanka 4.4 to 1, male female. Lithuania 5.8 to 1, Mongolia 5.2 to 1. I mean, it's just the numbers speak for themselves. I just wanted to add to what the article was saying in regards to what would lead someone to suicide. And I believe one contributing factor is purpose. And I believe that males who go that route of committing suicide, they may feel that they don't have a purpose. And I believe all men need a purpose and do have a purpose in life. It's just discovering what it is, and that takes time. And I believe that it could come from observing someone, having a mentor, preferably someone like your father who you probably look up to, or a friend, an uncle, someone on TV that you admire, anyone. But most men look to someone to discover their purpose in life. And for me personally, at first and foremost, I'm a Christian, so I believe that my purpose is to serve God and whatever calling He has for me and do well to please Him. That's my purpose. Now, what other things He has me do, like my job and other things like that, or maybe even this channel, that's all fine. But serving Him best I can in this life, I believe, is my purpose in life. And you may have a different purpose, you may have a similar purpose, but find that purpose, whatever it is. And I believe that males do need time to discover that. And I believe that men in their 20s, they should use those years to discover what that is. I always say that men in their 20s is focused on spirituality, getting right with God, finances, getting your money right, physicality, whether it's, if you're too thin, bulk up a little bit. If you're fat, slim down, eat right, who you hang out with, your social net, maybe weed off some people who are a bad influence or people who are holding you back from getting to that next level. Those things, and your education as well, discovering, learning. It doesn't have to be in a formal education, but through experience. But as you learn, and we're always learning, but those are the things that I believe help mold a man and help him discover what his purpose in this life is. And please, if you know anyone, or even if it's yourself, who feels suicidal, please look at these contacts, these organizations here, and contact someone, whether it's an organization or if it's a friend or family member, someone you know personally, maybe your pastor, your priest. Please call that person, because you are loved. You are loved. And I know I don't go too religious on this channel, but based on my faith as a Christian, God loves you. Christ loves you. So do not take that step in committing suicide. Please contact someone, whether it's one of these organizations here or your priest, your pastor, or just pray. But please know that you are loved. You are loved. Now, let's get back to the rest of the video. Now, I've seen Ava Evans in various videos on Piers Morgan, okay? And there's one I remember when they were talking about Me Too. Remember this?
But Ava, you're smirking and laughing. I mean, there's a serious point here. A lot of young men feel they're getting disenfranchised by society. They're all being over-demonized, that any attempt to be the traditional male figure is now being rubbished and called toxic.
Well, I mean, if you really felt that and you really went out there and you were an alpha male, then you wouldn't be bothered about a bunch of women telling you that you were.
Well, you would if
like
you get cancelled, like Andrew
Tate.
If you get banned from.
I mean, he's hardly been cancelled. He was on your programme, which is on national television.
But
so
it's the only platform actually he's
cancellation.
had for a long time, because all the social media companies banned him, literally banned him. He had his email gone, his Google gone, his Facebook gone. It all went down like dominoes.
Well, he's still on there, very, very prolific on there. I can't move for clips of him.
Yeah, but they're
on
not
TikTok.
generated by him now.
But that's been for quite some time.
But should he
He's still
be
got
punished that way?
But what is punished? What is punished? It's
Punish
just,
is where
obviously...
companies take a decision which, in my view, in this case, was perverse, because they still allow, for example, the Ayatollah of Iran to have a Twitter account.
Yes.
So there's no consistency here at all.
Well, but however, we love a bit of free market. I'm sure you do, judging by that suit, which is lovely. But social media companies are private companies.
Can you not
they can do
objectify
whatever
them,
they can do.
I'll take
whatever
all the
they like.
objectification I like.
Of course you will, yeah. All right, Isabel.
But Ava, your point about, if men were that alpha, then they wouldn't be that bothered by this, doesn't really help us when it comes to boys growing up. And that is one of my worries, that for teenage boys now, they are so terrified of the consequences of putting a foot out of line. It's hard enough being a young teenager, working out how things are, working out how to do dating and all of that, without the terror that if you touch in the wrong place at the wrong time, you may find that your whole life is destroyed.
See, I
and there
like
is
that
far
terror.
too much Well,
I like that.
As a
I
mother
think
of
that
a
men
teenage
should be
boy, I
frightened.
don't like
Really?
that
That's
parent.
I do.
Malicious thing I've ever heard.
That is
I think that
awful.
men should be frightened
I think
to
you'd
touch
feel
women in a way
differently
that
if you
they're
were,
not
if
comfortable
you were.
with.
But we're talking about
Yeah, but we're not talking
teenagers,
about. We're
children.
not talking about.
We're talking
but
about
it's an
young
interesting
children.
thing that you see. I would say that attitude actually is part of the problem too.
It
That
is.
is that's to me toxic femininity.
It is.
That is saying you should all be terrified, you men, if you put one.
assaulting.
Well, I think we all understand what sexual
What is an
assault is.
assault?
What Isabel's talking about is that young teenage clumsiness
really
in many
hard.
cases, which is now being recategorized as assault. Is that a problem?
It's not being recategorized as assault. It's always been assault. It's just we're finally talking about it.
I don't agree with that.
Oh, but wait, there's more.
Why would you want to remove just from yourself the right to vote?
Well, what happened was I had the same view, right? Back when I started, I was like, why? I found out that only 5% of women wanted the right to vote. And I couldn't figure out, like, why would women not? No, it's true. It's true.
At,
You
the
look it up.
at the time.
At the time.
Because they've been conditioned by men to think that they shouldn't have a vote.
I mean, that's what they say, but I started reading their writings, right? And what I found out was that the reason a lot of women advocated for it was because they believed it was the beginning of the breakdown of the family. Before you became one in marriage, 85% of people were married. And, I hate to say it, but they were right. What has happened 100 years later?
What's that got to do with them having the vote?
Well, it also goes back to responsibility. Again, men are 80 to 90% of the military. They run all of the infrastructures that make society run. So I just think if we want an equal say in society, then be equal. Do 50% of the hard jobs. Be 50% of the military. In the U.S., they're fined $250,000 if they don't join selective service, which is essentially the draft.
Okay, but specifically on the vote, what would having the right to vote have to do with family cohesion, for example?
Well, because again, before you weren't trying to divide a family. It was one family unit. You had one vote for the family. I mean, I don't think it's good for a family to have two votes.
Ava, your mouth seems to have dropped about
No, do you know when it's
3
sort of
feet.
like,
I know.
it's just sort of a bit galaxy brain. I feel like, the stats that you're putting down are perhaps correct in some universe.
Which stats?
But they just kind of don't really add up. I mean, just to take you back to the to the women's writings that you've allegedly read. I mean, at
Allegedly?
The time, well, at
What
the
do you
time
mean allegedly?
At the time that you're talking about, women weren't really allowed to write. They weren't allowed to go to school.
So is that true? So I looked it up and I came across an article from time.com and it's titled 5 Myths About the 19th Amendment and Women's Suffrage Debunked, August 18th, 2020. I'm going to skip down to the myth. All women wanted the right to vote. The reality, some women opposed the 19th Amendment. Oppose women suffrage. The history of all states where women have the vote proves there is nothing to be gained by women's suffrage. Women stand much to lose by suffrage because suffrage demands quote-unquote equal rights. Where men only vote, women enjoy much superior rights and privileges. A strong nation can be built only on strong homes. The philosophy of women's suffrage is a blow at the home. To the suffragette, the father is but the casual parent, and maternity, in the words of Mrs. Pankhurst, becomes quote-unquote a protected industry. Women's suffrage is a fundamental principle of socialism. It represents that theory of government which says the individual is the unit of society and not the family. The boys who will come back from France have not been fighting for women who would be imitators of men, quote unquote, but for the type of woman represented by their mothers and grandmothers. Exactly. Women's suffrage deprives women of her greatest political power, which is her non-partisan power in the community. Enfranchised, she must become the member of a political party. The following words of Ms. Pankhurst in October's Everybody's are a great revelation as to the aims and ideals of the suffragists. She will never again be reconciled to a round of bedmaking and dishwashing when she has proved her economic worth, and her very maternity will take on the status of a protected industry. After the war, millions of men will be mustered out of active service. But of the millions of women whom the war mustered into industry, not one will be mustered out. And who will wash the dishes and raise the babies? It is significant that, as stated by W.W. Gregg in the New York Times, September 15th, in his article, The Third Sex, all of the 8 foremost leaders of women's suffrage of the present day are childless. Oklahoma Association opposed to women suffrage. And this was written in 1918, anti-suffrage poster or broadside issued by the Oklahoma Association opposed to women's suffrage. Just as women today don't represent a single unit voting bloc and don't always vote for female candidates, some women in the late 1800s and early 1900s opposed extended suffrage. Some believed voting would distract women from their far more important roles as mothers and wives and ruin happiness in the home, says Sally G. McMillan, historian and author of Seneca Falls and the Origins of the Women's Rights Movement. In addition, amid a period of a great wave of immigration back then, McMillan says some feared the political impact of extending the vote to immigrant women. Many anti-suffragists were upper-class female philanthropists who feared more women voting would threaten their influence. Many of them thought that gaining the right to vote would be a loss to them in terms of their power in the family and their role as the arbiters of moral and social purity, says Laura McEnvore Thompson. Associations taking that side of the argument sprouted up nationwide. In a 1909 publication titled The Remonstrance, Boston women argued that the women of the day was already overburdened with duties which she cannot escape and from which no one proposed to relieve her. The New Jersey Association opposed to women's suffrage argued that suffrage logically involves the holding of public office, which is inconsistent with the duties of most women. Others simply said that suffrage wasn't the most pressing issue, says Tretrault. Advocates for temperance and birth control thought such matters protected women's bodily freedom were more important. It seems like a lot of the stuff that they were thinking about in the early 1900s are pretty prominent today. And some of them seem to come true. So I wanted to share those two topics, the male suicide and the women's suffrage, because bottom line, Ava Evans doesn't know what she's talking about. She's another woman who is a parrot of the talking points that the feminist movement pushes out just to perpetuate the narrative. She doesn't do her own research. I found those two articles that I shared with you in a matter of minutes. Didn't take long at all. And if she actually did her research like Pearl did, she would have known that not all women, for example, wanted to vote. And male suicide is a very important issue that should be highlighted, not in a whole umbrella of other mental health issues. Now, I want to get back and briefly talk about the situation that Laurence Fox is in. Just after, maybe a day after he was sacked, he was arrested in his home. I mean, you guys in the UK, unbelievable. But you know what? The same thing is happening over here. MAGA supporters are getting arrested. The FBI now are targeting MAGA supporters. Hillary Clinton recently just said that MAGA supporters need to be deprogrammed. So, as I said earlier in this video, a lot of stuff that happens in the UK eventually trickles down here to the US in about 2 to 5 years. But considering the climate we're in today, it's accelerating a lot faster. Sky News, it's GB joke. Laurence Fox hits out at GB News after learning of sacking in police station. The actor and political activist was detained earlier on suspicion of conspiring to commit criminal damage to ULEZ cameras and was also sacked by GB News following his controversial comments about journalist Ava Evans. October 4th, 2023. Laurence Fox has criticized GB News, calling the broadcaster GB joke, and spoken of his relief that he has been sacked. The actor and political activist told Sky News he had discovered he had been fired while in a police station following his arrest. He was detained on suspicion of conspiring to commit criminal damage to ULEZ cameras. While in custody, GB News said it had concluded internal investigations into comments made by Fox about journalist Ava Evans on Dan Wootton's Tonight and has subsequently ended its employment relationship with the 45-year-old. Speaking outside Croydon Police Station after being released on Wednesday night, Fox said he had learnt of his sacking while in custody. "It's not GB News, it's GB joke," Fox said. "I found out about the GB News sacking in there, the police station." They went, "By the way, you've been sacked and there's loads of paparazzi out there." And I was like, phew. Asked about his arrest, Fox said, "They've let me go. It's a these con make a big thing out of laws." I'm assuming that's a UK phrase. Maybe make a big thing out of nothing. You guys in the UK, you tell me. If Sadiq Khan thinks he can scare me, I've been intimidated by his coppers before. On GB News, Fox added, "I don't know whether it's good for a business to lose its USP, but at least I don't have to go there every Friday night and have someone pretend that they believe in free speech while not believing in free speech whatsoever. Just a side note, two things. One, Katie Hopkins, I'm sure you guys know her, was on Patrick Bet-David's podcast just over a year ago and had this to say about freedom of speech in the UK.
Freedom of speech. So you're saying, hey, you still have freedom of speech. Some people will say it's kind of gradually going away. And, some things are being, but still, how different is that in UK?
So for us, we have such a large web of hate speech laws. So effectively, truth becomes hate speech. And therefore, if you speak the truth, it's an arrestable offence. I've been arrested for a column in a newspaper. For example, we have people arrested for comments on chat groups, or if you make a comment on a Facebook page that is not deemed as appropriate, that is hate speech, police officers turn up at your door and arrest people. And arguably you've got hints of that here when you have the FBI turning up at James O'Keefe's door for no apparent reason other than he's on the wrong team. Certainly for us, when I left the UK a couple months ago, the last thing I did was a big stand-up night in a theatre with a guy that is just doing similar to what I do. That guy is now in prison in the UK. He was sentenced that week when we got off stage. He was sentenced to 5.5 years in jail for speech, for videos on YouTube that were said to be stalking and harassment of people. Basically doing what we're just doing this. He was just bringing up different people, Meghan Markle, somebody. It was a lot of the BBC he was going for, a lot of their presenters. But for doing this, it was the first case of its kind, and when you get new law, you know you're always in trouble. New law that said that was stalking, online stalking, and he's now inside 5.5 years.
Free speech is under attack in the UK, and it is in the US. And the second thing I wanted to mention, off topic, but about the UK, you English men and women out there, okay, because they don't call you English anymore. They call you Britons, because it just encompasses everybody. But you English men and women out there, your demographic is shrinking by the day. And another demographic, and you know who I'm talking about, is increasing by the day. And we have our problems over here. Our southern border is wide open. People are flooding in every day. Even sanctuary cities like New York, they're saying no more, no more. These politicians are like, no, no, no. Chicago, people in Chicago are like, no, no, no. We have our issues. But again, what happens across the pond eventually comes here. And you guys are having a big demographic shift. GBN News said its internal investigation into Wooten continues, while another host, Calvin Robinson, has also been sacked, which again is ridiculous. Ridiculous. Calvin Robinson, why was he sacked? Fox, who is a leader of the Reclaim Party, said in a social media video shared earlier on Wednesday that his home was being searched by police officers. Just before 10:45 a.m., the party posted on X, formerly Twitter, saying, "Live now, Laurence Fox is having his house searched by the police." The post was accompanied by a video of Fox sitting on his sofa addressing the camera, seemingly with police officers around him.
Morning, guys. In London's knife-ridden capital city, where a 15-year-old girl was stabbed to death with a sword, we've got 1, 2, you can show them, 1, 2, another 3 upstairs, stealing, going through my house to intimidate me, because this is what the police are. They don't police with consent anymore. They police with fear and intimidation. That is the Stasi police force that we've got nowadays. Instead of being on the streets solving crimes like the murder of the poor 15-year-old girl, they're on all over social media. I'd take it. The ULEZ scam cameras outside of London are the outer ULEZ zone is a complete scam. There's no scientific evidence. Sadiq Khan rubbished the evidence and had it rewritten to serve his own needs. No one voted it. It's the beginning and bringing in of a surveillance state. And he's trying to make noises so that I can't say that. It's the beginning of a surveillance state, and these boys are the Stasi. Sadiq Stasi. Bless them. So have a lovely day. I'm going to spend my day in the clink, innit?
In the short clip, he says, "Look how many coppers there are around my house." In another video of Fox at his house, he also shared to X, he criticized the move to what he called a surveillance state. Media watchdog Ofcom confirmed it had received almost 9,000 complaints about the GB News program as details of Fox's arrest emerged. On Tuesday, Fox appeared in a video voicing his support for so-called ULEZ Blade Runners who have been tearing down cameras. I encourage them to tear down every single camera. I encourage them to tear down every single camera there is, he said in the clip, which he shared on social media. I'll be joining them to tear down cameras as well because I'm one of those people that puts my money where my mouth is. I will be out there with my angle grinder. I would encourage mass removal of the surveillance state. I would be happy to be arrested myself. In a statement confirming a suspect has been arrested, a police spokesperson said, on Wednesday, the 4th of October, officers arrested a 45-year-old man on suspicion of conspiring to commit criminal damage to ULEZ cameras and encouraging or assisting offenses to be committed. He was arrested in Stockwell and taken to a South London police station. He has since been bailed to return on a date in mid-December pending further inquiries. So I wanted to surmise this current situation between Laurence Fox, Ava Evans, and GBN. So a quick recap. Laurence Fox was sacked by GBN because he said a thing on their program that the executives viewed as misogynistic, so they felt the need to sack him. Dan Wooten was sacked because he laughed, smirked at the comments Laurence Fox was making on the program. Okay. Then the next day, the police went to his home, Laurence Fox's home, and arrested him for pre-crime because he said a thing about those cameras. But what do you think? Do you think what Laurence Fox said was cause for him being sacked? Do you think Dan Wooten should have been sacked? Do you think him being arrested was warranted? Even though he didn't commit the crime, he just said a thing about the cameras. Do you think his arrest was warranted? Let me know in your comments below, but please also like, share, and subscribe. Hit the notification bell to get notified of future videos. Thank you for watching until the very end. And until the next one, take care.